Can we all say that out loud together? Because it really would help my heart if you knew that. Thank you. What a smart young man we have back there. How old are you, son?
6.
Future America, right there. Do you want to be president or an astronaut?
Tell her what you want to be.
What do you want to be?
Marine biologist.
Yes! Marine biologist. So our traditionally lawful purposes for keeping and possessing arms is to control government. And that's what the Supreme Court was referring to. So the right to possess, the right to keep, is an individual right for traditionally lawful purposes. Those traditionally lawful purposes are self-preservation and defense from government abusing our rights. Now what's interesting is there's another depth to all of this that we miss because we failed to teach properly about inherent natural rights. Now this guy, how many of you know who this guy is? It's James Madison, right? What's James Madison's nickname in history? Say it louder for me. Father of the Constitution. How many of you remember hearing that? Father of the Constitution, right? So James Madison wrote an essay in 1792 to explain to his generation, specifically to Congress, the definition of the word property. I want you to see how deep this is, how important this is. He says this term property in its particular application means that dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world in exclusion to every other individual. This is not mine. This is his. Can I take it without his permission? No, so it is his property. But watch what Madison says. There is a larger and juster meaning in the word property. It embraces everything to which a man may attach a value or have a right. So, we have a right to freedom of speech, right? Madison's telling you that's property. You have a right to freedom of religion. That's just telling you it's property. Now watch this. He says you have a property very dear to you in the safety and liberty of you, of your person. Our officers say that a lot. He had a gun on his person. On you. You see, your right to keep and bear arms is not just simply reflective of the property of the gun and the ammunition. The very right itself is property. So when you're thinking about violations of your right to keep and bear arms, it's not just simply a violation of your right to keep and bear arms, it's a property violation in multiple aspects. The right to keep and bear arms is a personal right. It is a natural right. It is a personal property right. So gun laws don't simply violate the Second Amendment. They violate the Fourth Amendment as well. That's what that word affects means. It's like a catch-all. It's everything that we consider to be property. And James Madison explains to you when they wrote the Fourth Amendment, their definition of property included the very right you have to that property. See, the right to property was just as much of a motivation to codify the Second Amendment as was to prevent the government from taking If you listened to the show, anybody listened to the show yesterday? I read a CNBC article where it said that our generation we've referred to as millennials, they're leaving their jobs and seeking disability for mental illness because now they believe that stress at the workplace is a mental illness. I mean, seriously, how do we fund a society where a whole generation of workers are on disability because if they feel stress in the workplace, they now are mentally ill? And how does that undermine real issues with people? Meeting the needs that are truly having problems.
It's fraud.
The Fourth Amendment is very clear. You have a right to be secure in your person's, house's, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And that right shall not be violated. And the only definition of a reasonable search and seizure is one that contains a warrant based upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or things to be seized. That word "and" is a very important conjunction because it's not "or." Everybody recognize the difference between "and" and "or"? If it said "or," you could have any one of them or any three of them. But it says "and," so you have to have all five things at the same time to be a reasonable search and seizure. By the way, the Fourth Amendment doesn't have a comma after seized, that's a period. And there isn't a comma that says unless it's a matter of national security. I want you to think about something for a while. I want you to meditate on this. Because the Fourth Amendment is very clear and it is very precise. Every exception to your right to be secure in your property is an exception that has been created by someone in government to expand the power of someone in government. So the right to keep and bear arms is also a property right, and the Fourth Amendment secures your property from unreasonable searches and seizures. But can I also tell you the Fifth Amendment secures your property, says the government cannot take your property without due process and just compensation. The Sixth Amendment declares that before the property of your liberty can be taken, you are entitled to a trial by jury of your peers, to confront the witnesses against you, to provide witnesses for your defense, and to have an attorney if you cannot, to have an attorney to represent you. The Seventh Amendment says that if it's a civil taking of your property by the government, you have a right to a jury trial if your property is worth more than $20. Is your firearm worth more than $20? You have a right to a trial by jury if the government is taking it from you. Is your right to liberty, is your property and liberty worth more than $20?
Yes.
The Eighth Amendment says that you're entitled to be free from cruel and unusual punishments and excessive fines. If you've committed no crime, is it excessive for the government to take your property?
Yes.
If it's a federal gun law, it violates the Ninth Amendment because it takes your rights that are yours by universal declaration by God Himself, and it also violates the 10th Amendment because the right to keep and bear arms was never a power delegated to the federal government. It is a power that is reserved to the states. So now federal gun laws that mirror the Bill of Rights in our federal Constitution. Your right to bear arms in Article 2, Section 5. The citizens of the state shall have the right to keep and bear arms for their common defense. You can't commonly defend something you don't have the authority to individually defend. So we must look at these things. We have to start asking the right questions. Because there are people who are out there who are either deceived or wish to deceive you for their own gain. Now, call me crazy, but I think the words right to keep and bear arms are pretty self-explanatory. And most of the confusion, I'll say loosely, that I find in government briefs and government assertion revolve around the first 4 words, a well-regulated militia. Because the government attorneys will write in their briefs that the Second Amendment doesn't mean your right to keep and bear arms, even though it does say your right to keep and bear arms. What they really mean is people in government have a right to keep and bear arms, because the Second Amendment reads a well-regulated militia, and everybody knows that nobody regulates as well as government. You laugh, but this is what college-educated people come up with. My husband has a favorite saying, you gotta go to college to get that done. But you see, I'm not about polling the Supreme Court about what the militia means. And it's completely worthless to ask anybody in government, because what? They're not the authors of the Second Amendment. If you want to know what the Second Amendment means, and you want to be accurate, and you want to have the proper credible source, you have to go to the people who actually wrote it. Good news. They wrote reams and reams and reams and reams and reams about what they meant. So there ought to be no confusion. And of the things they did disagree upon, of all the things they did debate, this was one not so much. Everybody, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, were all on the same track on this one. Maybe they had different ideas about how to achieve the preservation of it, but they all had the same definition. What is a free state? If the purpose for keeping and bearing arms is to secure a free state, what does that mean? This was one. This is George Mason. And just like James Madison is referred to as the father of the Constitution, George Mason is referred to as the father of the Bill of Rights. Now, I've selected 4 sources for you to help us understand what these terms actually mean. That doesn't mean there are only 4. I've chosen these 4 because we don't have a week to go through them all. And I chose them because I thought they would probably be the most influential. Being that George Mason is referred to as the father of the Bill of Rights, I thought he would have some good authority, right? Look at what he says. 40 years ago, when the resolution of enslaving America was formed in Great Britain, Parliament was advised by an artful man who was governor of Pennsylvania. Now, when the Americans were colonists and lived in colonies and not in states, the governors were appointed by the king. So in the mid-1740s, the governor of Pennsylvania was a loyalist to the king. And in the mid-1740s, the colonists were already becoming unsettled. Benjamin Franklin had already been publishing his letters for 20 years by the time you get to the mid-1740s. He says that this governor of Pennsylvania advised Parliament to disarm the people, that it was the best and most effectual way to enslave them. But wait. Don't do it openly. You have to weaken them and let them sink gradually. Don't show up on their doorstep to take their guns because they'll shoot you in the forehead. Right? Can I get an amen? Here's what you gotta do. You gotta set up an environment where they don't think they need them anymore. Maybe there's plenty of other people to protect them. You gotta set up an environment where they think they don't want them anymore. They're dangerous. You gotta set up an environment where it's difficult to get them. So it's too much trouble. And when they've been brainwashed into thinking they don't need to carry them, when they've been brainwashed into thinking they don't need to be trained in them, when they're brainwashed into thinking they don't need to have them, when they're brainwashed into thinking that it's just too difficult to get them, it's too expensive, there's too much paperwork, and what's the point anyway? Then you can start gradually taking them away. See, I told you. This is built in history. And history always repeats. And those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes.